My name is Naomi Carter, and this is the part of my life I once tried to forget. Don't come home right now. Those were the first words my stepfather said after I told them the money was gone. I was still standing in my kitchen when the message arrived. My phone rested in my hand, the screen glowing in the quiet apartment. Outside, rain pressed softly against the windows. The room felt too still, like something inside it had quietly broken. Only a minute earlier, I had finished the call with my mother. I had told her exactly what my lawyer instructed me to say. I lost the $50 million from the company sale. There had been a long pause on the line, not shock, not concern, just silence. Then she said, very calmly, "That was extremely irresponsible, Naomi." After that, she ended the call. No one asked if I was all right. No one asked how it happened. They only reacted to the money. Welcome to Auntie Rose narrates. Before today's story of betrayal and self-discovery, please subscribe and hit like to help these stories be heard. Drop your sit your country in the comments. It always warms my heart. Now, let's begin. My phone buzzed again on the table. Don't come home right now. We can't deal with this kind of recklessness. I read the message twice. Near the door, a packed suitcase leaned against the wall from my last work trip. I had planned to unpack it that night, but suddenly it looked different, like it had been waiting there for another reason. A bag packed by accident, or a quiet reminder that sometimes you are not meant to stay. If you have ever felt invisible, you already understand this. At that moment, I believed the worst thing was how quickly my family turned cold, but the real fracture happened later. At 3:17 in the morning, when my cousin Lena sent me a screenshot of a family group chat. I was never supposed to see. The message from Lena arrived at 3:17 in the morning. I was still awake when my phone lit up on the kitchen table. The rain outside had slowed to a soft, steady rhythm, and the apartment felt unusually quiet. The packed suitcase near the door was still there from my last business trip, half leaning against the wall like it had been waiting all night for a decision I have not made yet. Lena's message was short. Naomi, I think you need to see this. Below the text was a screenshot. I opened it slowly, not expecting anything serious. Maybe someone in the family had asked about the money. Maybe someone was worried, but the image that filled my screen was something else entirely. It was a private family group chat. Title at the top read family planning. My name was not listed anywhere in the participants. For a few seconds, I just stared at it. Then my eyes moved down to the first message visible in the screenshot. It was written by my mother. "This is our chance." Underneath that message, the rest of the conversation continued in short lines. My uncle Mark wrote, "If she really lost the $50 million, she's not useful to us anymore." My sister Olivia replied a minute later, "I told you she would crash eventually." Then my stepfather added another message, "We need to move fast before she finds out about the trust." I read that line twice. The trust. The word sat on the screen like something heavy. No one in my family had ever mentioned a trust before. My fingers felt strangely cold as I scrolled through the rest of the screenshot. My Aunt Rebecca had written, "Pull the paperwork tomorrow. Don't let Naomi know anything yet." And finally, my mother replied again, "We waited long enough. If she has nothing left, there's no reason to keep her involved." I set my phone down slowly on the table. The room felt different after that. Not louder, not darker, just emptier somehow. For a long moment, I didn't move. I simply listened to the quiet sounds of the apartment, the refrigerator humming, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. When I finally picked up the phone again, I looked at the screenshot once more. A strange realization settled slowly in my chest. The messages hurt, but they did not surprise me as much as they probably should have, because if I was honest with myself, The distance between me and my family had not started that night. It had been forming quietly for years, not through loud arguments or dramatic confrontations, through small moments, quiet ones. Moments that most people would probably overlook. I remember a dinner from years earlier when we were all sitting around the kitchen table at my parents' house. My mother had cooked roast chicken, the same meal she made almost every Sunday evening. The table was full. My stepfather sat at the head, while my sister Olivia spoke about her new job. Everyone listened closely. My mother asked questions. My uncle laughed at one of Olivia's stories. When she finished talking, my brother Daniel began explaining his plan to move into a bigger apartment closer to his office. Again, everyone listened carefully. My mother leaned forward with interest. "That sounds like a smart decision," she said. Then there was a small pause in the conversation. I cleared my throat. Gently, "I've been working on something too," I said. A few people looked toward me. I explained that I had been building software for small businesses, a platform that helped store customer information and track sales patterns. I tried to describe it in the simplest way possible, but halfway through my explanation, my stepfather reached for his glass of water and looked away. My sister checked something on her phone. My mother nodded politely, but her attention drifted back toward Olivia. When I finished speaking, there was a brief silence. Then my stepfather said, "That sounds complicated." And the conversation moved on. No, one asked another question. Moments like that became normal over time. In the car during long drives, conversations would happen across the front seats while I sat quietly in the back. At family gatherings, plans were discussed in the living room while I stood nearby pretending to scroll through my phone. Now, one was rude. No one told me to leave, but slowly, I realized something simple. I was not part of the center of the conversation. I was somewhere at the edge of it. Once, during Thanksgiving dinner, my aunt began talking about a summer vacation the family was planning. Everyone started discussing possible locations. Beach towns, mountain cabins. Flight prices. Dates. The conversation lasted nearly 10 minutes. Finally, I asked a small question. "When are you planning to go?" The table grew slightly quiet. My aunt looked at me with mild surprise. "Oh, I thought you would be busy with work." My mother nodded as if that explained everything. "Yes, Naomi is always busy." No one asked if I wanted to come. The conversation simply continued. Later that evening, I helped my mother wash the dishes in the kitchen. Neither of us mentioned the trip again. Over time, moments like that stopped bothering me as much. I told myself everyone had different lives. Different priorities, and my work gave me something important. Purpose. The company slowly became the place where I felt seen. Where people listened when I spoke. Where my ideas mattered. The early years were difficult, but the work kept moving forward. New clients signed contracts. The team grew. Investors started showing interest, and then eventually, the offer arrived. A large tech firm wanted to buy the company. The number they offered still feels unreal when I say it out loud. $50 million. When the deal closed, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the confirmation email on my laptop. For a long time, I didn't feel excitement. I felt relief because part of me believed that this success might finally change something with my family. Maybe the years of quiet distance would soften. Maybe we could start again. But before I told them anything, my lawyer David asked me to make that strange phone call. To tell them the money was gone. At the time, I thought it was simply a legal precaution. Now, sitting alone in the kitchen at 3 a.m, looking at the screenshot Lena had sent, I realized he had been testing something about my family, something about how they saw me. The packed suitcase by the door, caught my eye again. It had been sitting there all evening. Half ready. Half forgotten. For a moment I considered calling my mother back and asking about the trust. The thought faded quickly because the truth had already shown itself in those messages. My family had been making plans about my life without ever including me. And now they were doing it again. Only this time I could see it clearly. That night I didn't respond to Lena's message, didn't call my mother, I didn't contact anyone in the group chat. Instead, I turned off the kitchen light and walked slowly down the hallway toward my bedroom. The apartment felt unusually quiet as I closed the door behind me. And for the first time, I understood something that had been building quietly for years. Sometimes, you do not realize you have already been left behind until the silence finally reaches you. The morning after Lena sent the screenshot, the rain had stopped. Sunlight moved slowly across the floor of my apartment, touching the edge of the packed suitcase that still leaned against the wall near the door. I stood there for a long time looking at it. The bag felt different now. Last night it had looked like something temporary, something waiting to be unpacked. Now it felt like a quiet question. I didn't open it. Instead, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with my phone in my hand. Several messages from family members had arrived overnight, but none of them asked about me. They talked about logistics. About paperwork. About next steps. I didn't answer any of them. Around mid-morning, my lawyer, David Miller, called. His voice sounded calm, the same way it always did. Did you make the call? He asked. Yes, and? I told him about the messages. Then I told him about Lena's screenshot and the group chat conversation. There was a quiet pause on the line. I suspected something like this, he said gently. I leaned back in my chair. You suspected my family would react like that? Not exactly, he replied. But I wanted you to see clearly how people behave when they believe the money is gone. I didn't respond. After a moment, he spoke again. Naomi, I think you need some distance, right? Now, the word distance stayed with me after the call ended. That afternoon, I zipped the suitcase. Close. Not because I was leaving the city. Just because I realized something simple. I wasn't ready to stay in that apartment anymore. It carried too many memories of a life that suddenly felt uncertain. David had mentioned a small legal office building his firm owned across town. The upper floor had a quiet workspace that some of their startup clients occasionally used. He offered to let me work there for a while. So 2 days later, I moved a few things into that space. It wasn't glamorous. The building sat on a quiet street above a bakery. Every morning, the hallway smelled faintly like warm bread and coffee. The office itself was simple. One desk. One couch, a small table near the window. The first morning I arrived, a woman in her mid-40s knocked gently on the open door. Hi, she said with a warm smile. You must be Naomi. Her name was Clara. She managed the building and handled small administrative work for David's law firm downstairs. In her hands, she carried a small paper bag. I thought, you might not have had breakfast yet, she said. The bakery downstairs had extra pastries. She placed the bag on the table and left without waiting for a response. Inside were 2 croissants and a folded napkin. I wasn't used to small gestures like that. At first, I didn't even eat them, but after an hour of staring at my laptop, I finally opened the bag. They were still warm. That became the first quiet routine. Every morning, Clara would knock once on the door. Sometimes she brought coffee. Sometimes fruit. Sometimes nothing at all except a simple greeting. Morning, Naomi. And then she would disappear. Down the hallway again. We didn't talk much in the beginning. Some days we only exchanged a few sentences, but there was something steady About her presence, she never asked. About the company sale, she never asked about my family. She simply treated me like someone who belonged in the room. At first, I didn't trust the calmness of it. Years of emotional distance had trained me to expect quiet judgment hiding beneath kindness. So I kept my conversations with Clara short. Polite. Careful. Weeks passed that way. The small office slowly became familiar. In the afternoons, sunlight would reach across the desk and warm the wooden floor. The bakery downstairs closed around 5 each evening, and the building would grow silent. Sometimes Clara would leave a small handwritten note near the coffee machine. Fresh tea in the cabinet. Orton. Forget to eat something. The notes were simple, but I began keeping them in a small drawer. The suitcase remained in the corner of the office for several weeks. I used things from it occasionally, but I never fully unpacked. Part of me still felt like I was only staying temporarily, like this quiet place might disappear if I trusted it too much. One evening, about a month after I started working there, Clara knocked on the door again. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but it's late. Have you eaten dinner?" I looked up from my laptop. "I'm fine," I replied automatically. She studied me for a second, then she said something very simple. "I made soup tonight." Too much for one person? She didn't push. She didn't insist. She simply placed a container on the table and walked away. I stared at it for a long moment. Then eventually I opened the lid. It was vegetable soup. Nothing special, but it was warm that night. For the first time in weeks, the office didn't feel like a temporary shelter. It felt quiet. Safe. Trust didn't arrive suddenly. It grew slowly. Through routines, through small conversations in the hallway, through shared silence while drinking coffee in the mornings. Months passed. The suitcase eventually became less important. One afternoon, I realized I hadn't opened it in days. So I unpacked it, folded the clothes neatly into the small cabinet near the desk. Placed my laptop charger permanently beside the table. The moment felt strangely significant, like closing a door I didn't need anymore. A few weeks later, something else happened. It was my birthday. I had not told anyone. Birthdays had become quiet events in my life over the years, and I preferred it that way. But when I arrived at the office that morning, I found a small box sitting on the table. Next to it was a note. I saw the date on one of the documents yesterday. Thought you shouldn't spend the day without cake. Clara. Inside the box was a small chocolate cake from the bakery downstairs. No candles. No decorations. Just cake. Clara didn't even mention it. When I saw her later in the hallway, she simply smiled and asked how my morning was going. I ate the cake slowly at the desk that afternoon. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. A few weeks after that, David stopped by the office. We spoke about some legal documents related to the company sale. Before he left, he placed something small on the table, a key. The building owner approved it, he said. You can keep the office as long as you need. I picked up the key and turned it in my hand. It was just a simple brass key, but something about it felt heavy. Not because of the metal, because of what it meant. Later that evening, when the building had grown quiet again and the sun had almost disappeared outside the window, Clara passed by the open door. Heading home? She asked. I looked around the room, the unpacked shelves, the desk, small kitchen counter where the coffee machine sat. Then I said something without thinking too much about it. I already am. Clara smiled softly and continued down the hallway. And for the first time in many years, the word home didn't feel complicated when I said it. Life in the quiet office above the bakery slowly settled into a rhythm, Mornings usually began the same way. The smell of fresh bread drifted up through the hallway vents, and sunlight moved gently across the wooden floor near my desk. Clara would pass by with a small wave, sometimes leaving coffee near the door, sometimes just offering a quick smile before continuing with her day. The brass key David had given me stayed in my bag at first. I carried it everywhere but rarely used it. For weeks, I still arrived during normal office hours and left before the building closed, as if I were a visitor who didn't want to stay too long. But gradually, something shifted. One evening, I stayed late finishing a project. The bakery downstairs had already closed, and the building was quiet except for the soft hum of the lights above my desk. When I reached the front door, I realized the hallway lights were already off. For the first time, I took the key out of my pocket. The metal felt cool in my hand as I unlocked the door. It was a small action, but it carried a quiet sense of permission. I wasn't borrowing space anymore. I belonged there. Work slowly returned to my life, but it looked different from before. I wasn't building another company or chasing investors. Instead, I began helping small startup founders who came through David's office looking for legal advice. Many of them reminded me of myself years earlier. Tired, hopeful, a little overwhelmed sometimes. They asked questions about contracts or licensing, and David would direct them upstairs to speak with me. The conversations were simple. I would sit across from them at the small table near the window and listen to their ideas. Some were still rough concepts. Others were already functioning businesses struggling to grow. One afternoon, a young man named Aaron came in carrying a laptop bag that looked nearly as worn as the one I used during my early startup days. "I think I built something useful," he said nervously, "but I don't know how to explain it to investors." His voice reminded me of how I used to sound during my first presentations. Careful, uncertain. I asked him to show me what he had built. For the next 2 hours, we sat together reviewing his software and talking about how to organize his pitch. I explained the small lessons I had learned over the years, how to present ideas clearly, how to answer difficult questions, and how to protect your work legally. When he left, he shook my hand twice. "Thank you," he said. "Most people just tell me to come back when the business is bigger." I understood that feeling well. So helping people like Aaron slowly became part of my routine. Not in a formal way, just quiet conversations. When someone needed guidance, the strange thing was that the more I shared those lessons, the lighter my own past began to feel. The work didn't bring large paychecks the way my company once had, but the company sale had already secured my financial stability. David had helped structure the funds in a way that protected them quietly in the background. For the first time in my adult life, money wasn't something I worried about every morning. That freedom allowed me to choose my time carefully. I started volunteering once a week at a local community technology center that helped young adults learn basic programming skills. The building was small, with old computers and mismatched chairs, but the energy inside the room felt alive. Most of the students were people who had never imagined themselves working in technology. Some were trying to change careers. Others were simply curious. During the first class one taught, my hands felt strangely nervous as I stood in front of the whiteboard, not because the material was difficult, but because I had spent so many years building things quietly on my own that teaching others felt unfamiliar. Still, the students listened carefully as I explained the basics of writing simple code. One woman raised her hand halfway through the lesson. "Is it normal to feel lost at the beginning?" she asked. I smiled. "Yes," I said. "It's the most normal part." Over time, those classes became another steady part of my week. The students progressed slowly, learning how to build small programs and websites. Some evenings we stayed late solving problems together while rain tapped softly against the classroom windows. The work wasn't glamorous, but it felt meaningful. And each time a student completed their first project, the excitement in their voice reminded me why I had started building software in the first place. Months passed. My life grew quieter but more stable. Office above the bakery truly became part of my daily routine. Clara and I spoke more often now. Sometimes we shared lunch in the small kitchen area. Other days we simply worked in comfortable silence. The key I carried no longer felt heavy. It felt normal. One evening, after finishing a class at the community center, I returned to the office later than usual. The street outside was quiet, and the bakery lights were already off. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar smell of coffee still lingered in the air. I sat at my desk and looked around the room for a moment. The shelves held a few books now. A cabinet contained neatly folded clothes from the suitcase I had unpacked months earlier. The small drawer still held the notes Clara occasionally left near the coffee machine. For a long time, I simply sat there in the quiet. Then a thought arrived slowly. During the early years of building my company, almost every decision I made carried the same quiet pressure, the need to prove something. To my family, to investors, to the world. Every achievement had felt like evidence in an argument about my worth. But sitting there in that quiet office, surrounded by a life I had slowly rebuilt piece by piece, something inside me had changed. I realized I was no longer chasing approval from people who had already decided how they saw me, was no longer trying to force my success to be recognized. Instead, something calmer had taken its place, a steady understanding that didn't need constant confirmation. And the realization came to me in a simple sentence that formed quietly in my mind. Was no longer trying to prove my worth. I was learning to live inside it. That understanding didn't arrive with celebration or excitement. It simply settled there. Like the quiet warmth of the room around me. Outside, the streetlights glowed softly against the dark windows of the bakery downstairs. Inside, the small office remained calm and still. And for the first time in many years, I felt something that had once seemed impossible. Not victory, not revenge, just peace with the life I had built. The bakery downstairs had changed owners twice by then, but the smell of fresh bread still floated up the stairwell every morning. Some things in life shift constantly, others remain quietly familiar. The office above the bakery had changed a little too. The desk was the same, though the surface now carried small signs of tiny scratches from years of notebooks and coffee cups. The shelves were fuller, holding folders from the startups I had advised and the students I had mentored at the Community Technology Center. Clara still worked in the building. Her hair had more gray in it now, and she sometimes joked that the stairs felt steeper than they used to. But her routines remained steady. Most mornings, she still knocked once on my door before leaving. A cup of coffee near the edge of my desk. The brass key I had once carried carefully now rested in the small bowl beside the door. It had become just another part of daily life. By then, the quiet rhythm of my work had grown into something stable. The technology center had expanded into a larger program. Many of the students who once struggled through their first lines of code were now working in companies across the city. Some of them came back occasionally to teach new classes. Seeing them stand in front of the whiteboard where they had once sat nervously felt like watching a quiet circle complete itself. That afternoon had started like any other. I was reviewing a proposal from a young startup founder when Clara appeared at the doorway. She didn't step fully inside Dot instead. She stood there holding a small envelope. "Naomi," she said gently, "there are some people downstairs asking for you." I looked up from the document. "Who?" She hesitated for a moment. Then she said the names, my mother, my sister Olivia, and my stepfather. For a second, the room felt strangely still. 10 years had passed since the night I made that phone call and told them I have lost the $50 million. In those 10 years, none of them had visited. A few short emails had arrived during the early years, polite messages asking how I was doing, but there had been distance in every sentence, the kind of distance that made it clear they were unsure how to speak to me anymore. Now they were. Downstairs, Clara studied my expression. Quietly, "You don't have to see them if you don't want to," she said. I thought about that for a moment. Then I closed the folder on my desk. "It's all right," I said. "I'll come down." The bakery cafe on the ground floor had been renovated recently. The tables were newer, the walls brighter, but the soft sound of coffee cups and quiet conversations remained the same. When I stepped inside, I saw them sitting at a small table near the window. For a moment, I barely recognized them. Time had changed their faces in subtle ways. My mother's hair was thinner now. My stepfather's shoulders seemed smaller than I remembered. Olivia looked older, more tired. When they noticed me standing near the door, all three of them stood up at once. No. One spoke for a moment. Finally, my mother smiled. Politely, "Naomi," she said. Her voice sounded careful. We sat down at the table together. A waiter placed a glass of water in front of me, and the quiet sounds of the cafe continued. Around us, my stepfather cleared his throat. "We heard you were doing well," he said. I nodded once. "I've been busy." Olivia folded her hands together on the table. "We actually came because we're dealing with some complications back home." The words were vague, but the meaning underneath them was easy to hear. My mother leaned forward slightly. "The house your father left, it needs repairs, and some legal issues came up with the property." She paused. "We thought maybe you could help." There it was, the request, not spoken directly, but sitting quietly in the middle of the table. I listened without interrupting. My stepfather added another sentence. "You always had a good head for business. We figured you might know how to handle these things." No one apologized for the past. No one mentioned the group chat. No one mentioned the night they believed I had lost everything. The conversation moved carefully around those memories, as if they were fragile objects no one wanted to touch. I sat quietly for a moment, watching the steam rise from my untouched coffee cup. Then I looked at them. For the first time in years, I felt no anger, no bitterness, just a calm understanding. My mother spoke again. "It would mean a lot if you helped us figure things out." I nodded slowly. Then I said the one sentence that had been forming quietly in my mind since I walked into the cafe. "Family isn't defined by who shares your name," I said gently. "It's defined by who stays when you have nothing to give." The table fell silent. No one argued. No one protested. Because the truth had already settled into the space between us. I continued speaking calmly. "For a long time, I tried to earn a place in this family. I thought success might change how you saw me." I paused briefly, "but now I understand something different." My voice remained steady. "The longing isn't something you negotiate after the fact." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. My mother looked down at the table. Olivia stared quietly at her hands. My stepfather shifted slightly in his chair, but said nothing. After a moment, I stood up. "I hope everything works out for you," I said gently. There was no anger in my voice. No dramatic farewell, just a simple closing of the conversation. I left a few bills on the table for the coffee and turned toward the door. Behind me, no one tried to stop me. When I stepped outside, the afternoon sunlight filled the street. The air smelled faintly of warm bread from the bakery ovens. Upstairs, the quiet office was waiting, and as I climbed the familiar staircase, I realized something important. The past had finally returned to find me, but it no longer had the power to decide where I belonged. After that afternoon in the cafe, life continued in its quiet, steady rhythm. My mother returned to her routines, managing her household and social circles as she had always done. Without my involvement, she faced the slow unraveling of decisions she had once assumed I would quietly support. Some of the investments she had made after the company sale underperformed, forcing her to adjust her lifestyle modestly. There was no dramatic fall, no public humiliation, only a quiet reckoning that came from relying on others instead of learning to act independently. My stepfather also experienced changes, subtle but real. Projects he had overseen without consulting me required more attention than he had anticipated. Without my input or willingness to intervene, he encountered small, cumulative setbacks that demanded patience and adaptation. The lessons were gradual, the kind that people learn when life asks them to handle responsibilities they once expected someone else to shoulder. He grew quieter, more reflective, and eventually began seeking advice in ways he had never before considered. Olivia's life shifted in ways that were less visible but equally meaningful. Ambitions she had pursued without grounding encountered natural challenges. Certain social and professional plans she had counted on did not unfold as expected. She faced the consequences of decisions made hastily or without careful thought. Slowly, over months, she adapted, learning to navigate her own path rather than relying on the assumption that family would always intervene on her behalf. Even my extended family, the uncles and aunts who had plotted quietly in the group chat, found themselves adjusting. The trust they had hoped to access remained protected, and they discovered that plans built on the absence of someone's voice do not always succeed as imagined. They faced the reality of their own ambitions versus the limits imposed by circumstances beyond their control. No one experienced dramatic downfall. Instead, each encountered a quiet accountability, a series of natural consequences that encouraged reflection and change. Meanwhile, I continued my life above the bakery, fully present in the routines I had chosen for myself. The brass key in my hand, the unpacked shelves, the small notes from Clara, all of it reinforced the life I had built intentionally. I watched from a distance as those who had once excluded me faced the effects of their choices. I did not gloat, did not feel satisfaction. The balance was quiet, subtle, and fair. Life simply required them to reckon with their own decisions, while I moved forward with clarity and purpose. Over time, the separation between our lives became clear. I had chosen stability, presence, and trust in myself. They had learned lessons of responsibility and the limits of influence. Nothing catastrophic occurred. No one suffered beyond the natural adjustments life required. And in that quiet, uncelebrated way, the consequences unfolded with calm honesty without cruelty. Without drama, only the gentle truth that actions have outcomes, and that belonging is earned through presence, not through expectation. Sitting at my desk in the quiet office above the bakery, I often think about how far life has carried me since that night 10 years ago. The brass key still rests in the small bowl near the door, a reminder of how much can change when you allow yourself to claim space that is truly yours. It isn't just about doors or offices, it's about permission, stability, and the quiet right to exist without negotiation. I've come to understand that family is not defined by shared names or history alone. Family is found in the people who show up, in the small, steady gestures that say, without words, "You belong here." Clara's daily knock, the notes she leaves by the coffee machine, the quiet presence of students and young founders who seek guidance, they are my family now. They remind me that connection doesn't require approval, and worth doesn't need to be proven. Over the years, I've learned to trust this quiet, chosen network. I still remember the unease of the early days, the hesitations before unpacking my suitcase, the reluctance to seek kindness as something safe. Those moments were necessary. They taught me how to protect myself while remaining open. They taught me the value of patience and consistency. Trust, like belonging, cannot be rushed. It grows slowly, nurtured by presence and care. Looking back, I realized that the family I once longed for, the one that rejected me when I needed it most, will always exist in memory. Their choices shaped me, but they do not define me. What matters is the life I have built and the spaces I have chosen, surrounded by people who stay. I have learned to celebrate these small, unwavering connections rather than mourn what could have been. Sometimes I still walk past that old suitcase, now tucked away in the corner of the office, and think about the journey it represents. I think about how far I've come, how steady life can feel when it's lived on your own terms. There's warmth here. There is peace. And there is a deep, enduring sense of belonging that comes not from expectation, but from presence. In the end, family is less about blood than about who chooses to be there. Day after day, through quiet acts of care, and that is enough. I have found that, finally, I am home.